Today I will be discussing the modality principle. This comes from a summary of Chapter 6, Applying the Modality Principle, and this presentation was put together by Kristen Costello, Maria Greenwood, Kathleen Johnson, and Adil Kamar. When presenting a multimedia presentation, do you think that it matters whether the words in the presentation are presented as a verbal description or on-screen text? The modality principle would say yes. It states that words should be put in spoken form rather than in printed form. This is especially necessary when the graphic is complex, the words are familiar, or the lesson is fast-paced. The modality principle applies in situations in which you present graphics and their verbal commentary at the same time. With the modality principle comes limitations. The principle suggests that using spoken words rather than printed words to help explain graphics. It suggested that this will help reduce the demands of visual processing. However, sometimes written words are necessary. Written words may be needed, such as when the new word is being introduced, a math formula is given, or directions are needed for a practice exercise. Some other limitations to the modality principle are that creating sound may involve technical demands that the learning environment cannot meet. The sound creates too much noise within the learning environment, and that it can make it more difficult to update as the information needed changes. In short, you need to be careful when choosing when to use sound versus written words. Thinking through these limitations may help with that decision. The modality principle is supported by a cognitive theory of multimedia learning. It assumes that learning is not only dependent on the information that is presented, but also the cognitive processes used by the learner to learn the material. This means that we not only have to think about the information we are trying to deliver, but how we are delivering it, so that the learner can process as much information as possible without experiencing an overload. When shown a slide with both on-screen text and graphics, the learner must use their visual channel to process both pieces of information. The text and graphics then compete against each other because of the channel's limited capacity. As a result, there's an overload of visual information. Luckily, we can use cognitive theory to fix this overload, since learners use different channels to process visual and auditory information. If the on-screen text is removed and delivered verbally, then it is processed through the auditory channel. This frees up the visual channel to focus solely on the graphics. Now neither channel experiences an overload, and the learner can process the information. Various studies have been conducted on the modality principle, and the majority of their findings support that graphics with narration can be more impactful than graphics with written text. In one study conducted by Moreno and Mayer in 1999, students were shown an animation depicting the steps of lightning formation. The first group of students had verbal narration to coincide with each step in the animation. The second group of students did not have verbal narration and instead had on-screen text describing each step. It is important to note that the narrated text for the first group and the on-screen text for the second group were identical. Both groups of students were later asked to apply their knowledge of lightning formation to problem-solving test questions. The study found that students in the first group, with the narrated text, were able to produce twice as many solutions as the second group with the on-screen text. These results are referred to as the modality effect. Additional eye-tracking studies found that students who had narration with the animated steps of lightning formation were able to spend more time looking at the graphics. Students who had on-screen text with the animations subsequently spent less time looking at the animation. This is consistent with cognitive theory, since the visual channel of the on-screen text group was being divided between processing the narration and reading the text. Here is an example where the modality principle is followed. It is an e-learning video for how to use Google Voice. I will play a few seconds of it.
Over time, humans have continually come up with new ways to communicate. And while we've come pretty far, there are still some things that don't quite work the way they should. For instance, consider voicemail, which you can only listen to by calling one number on your phone. It is stuck in your voicemail system, and it deletes itself automatically after 2 weeks. Or, say you're trying to reach a friend with a mobile phone, work phone, and a home phone. Right now, you might call each number one by one, trying to find the person. And after you finally leave a voicemail, the guy has to call the right voicemail box to find your message. So we asked, up with new ways to communicate.
This is an example of the modality principle guidelines, since it uses very few words on screen and describes the value of Google Voice using narration. The justification of the modality principle is that when learners are presented with words to read and words that are heard, they are overloading their visual channel with both text and pictures, rather than just focusing on their visual channel with images and their auditory channel presented with narrated words. Here is an example of where the modality principle is violated. It is an animation called How Are Tornadoes Formed? There's a link on the bottom if you would like to view the whole video. Pictured is a single frame from the animation. Rather than narrating each step and letting the learner focus on the graphics, the animation has on-screen text to accompany the animation. This creates an overload in the visual channel since the learner cannot completely focus on the animation since they must also read the text. Since we have now reached the end of our presentation, we would like to leave you with a few questions to think about. Our first question is, despite the modality principle, when might written text be more beneficial to the learner? We've gone over a few of these examples. Second question is, what are some of the challenges that you may encounter while trying to apply the modality principle in your classroom? This was discussed as limitations. Does the importance of the modality principle always stay the same, or does it fluctuate? Thank you for listening to the presentation. If you have any further questions, please leave a comment below.